Welcome back to the Professional Lovers channel. I'm Al.
I'm Patty, and
And
we
we
are
are
the
the
Professional
Professional
Lovers,
Lovers.
coming at you for another week of Married at First Sight recap.
Mhm.
Quite a little bit to talk about.
Yeah.
But before that, for those of you who are new, welcome. Thanks for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, consider it.
Please do.
Or at least like what you hear. We enjoy facilitating relationships and sharing experiences from our own as we look at building relationships through the eyes of Married at First Sight couples. And they give us a lot to talk about.
They do.
We also use some tips from our book, Becoming a Professional Lover. And so there were a couple of relevant tips from tonight's episode. So as usual, let's set the stage. A couple things. Dr. Pepper talked to all the couples tonight. And
Finally.
they had 2 homework assignments. One was to take each other to
Their childhood.
significant places in their childhood, or to walk their spouse through their childhood, and everybody did it in different ways. And also to write a letter to their younger self, and then to read that letter to the spouse, which would help each other understand
What makes them the person that they are.
exactly.
What are some of the elements that make them who they are today?
Right, and give more understanding about each other. So, but we're going to start tonight with how the show started. The girls meeting the girls and the guys meeting the guys. And of course, the whole conversation that we heard about from the girls' side was what was going on with Morgan and Ben, because Morgan and Ben had been absent from the last couple of outings that the couples have had. And so the girls were like, what's going on? And of course, she was explaining her side of the issues that she has had with Ben.
And what has caused them to be separated.
Right. Meanwhile, the guys were getting together and asking Ben about what was going on.
Where you been?
And he was giving his side to the issue. And then the girls got this brilliant idea to, let's go over and we're going to crash the guys' discussion, and we're going to support our girl as she faces off. And so they did. And it did kind of turn into, Miguel said, well, we've heard Ben's side. Morgan, let's hear your side. Yeah. And she began to give her side. And he asked, Ben, if what she was saying was a fair assessment. And I was a little surprised that he said yes.
So easily.
It's like he kind of folded everything, that all of his rationale for why he did what he did. And again, we have said that he should not have lied.
True.
And nobody's excusing that. But there was no explanation of why he did what he did.
He indicated no defense whatsoever.
None. Like completely folded to her assessment.
Yeah.
And then I appreciated Nate saying, but why the hostility?
Yeah. That
Morgan just kind of always comes across as being mad.
True.
And he was saying, it kind of appears like, nothing would make her happy.
And at this point, nothing would. Because she's made up her mind to be mad. And again, a lot of what goes on in a relationship is premised by decisions, not by feelings. Because your feelings come and go. And something may be said, something may be done that would cause you not to feel all that good about what's taking place. But again, it's how you respond to it that makes all the difference in the world, because depending on how you feel about it and how you respond to it is when it becomes an issue. It may be an element that you don't particularly care about express it, discuss it, get through it, move on. But harboring it and then having an emotional reaction to it, especially being negative, serves no purpose.
So let's just stay there with Morgan and Ben. Okay, when Dr. Pepper came to see them, Ben admitted that he didn't think that he had expectations, but it turned out that he did, that he was judgmental, but he was also scared to converse with Morgan.
And used the word scared.
Now, this dynamic is not really surprising if you have a person who's a people pleaser and a person who's domineering.
Yeah.
And
overbearing.
Morgan is definitely overbearing and domineering. And for a person like Ben, who is a people pleaser, which means I don't want conflict at all. I will just
I'll do whatever
I'll do whatever needs to be done. But having to go behind her back because he's too scared
to communicate
talk
with
to
her about the issues that they have.
And I found it interesting that she said when the husbands and wives were together, that if at any time Ben had come to me and said, "Oh, I've had a hard day, and I was venting to Justin, and here's what I said," I would have handled it a totally different way. No, you would not have, because you had already given the mandate. Don't say anything to Justin. So, and then when he says, "I'm scared to converse with her," Morgan's already set the stage.
True.
And there is no flexibility, understanding, sympathy, or empathy in that whole entire thing.
And to me, just that setting right there, where all the guys and the girls are together, you are the only 10 people on the planet at this particular time who are doing exactly what you're doing. So who better to talk to than the people who are experiencing what you're experiencing? You know, I mean, I understand about being private. I do understand that. And you want intimate things to remain between you. But just as a release, as a sounding board, as a matter of trying to understand even your own expectations. You know, I mean, I can imagine a lot of what he was saying was, you know, what should I do? Because this is what I'm being confronted with. Because he wants this thing to work. And at no time does Ben ever seem to be a malicious personality or character. And I think he comes from a genuine place, even if it is a genuine place of naivete, but it's genuine. It's who he is. He just wants this thing to be better than what it is.
So Dr. Pepper gave them the homework assignment of writing a letter to your younger self, reading it to each other, as a way of trying to understand where each other's coming from. And when Morgan comes to the apartment to do this assignment. Okay, and Ben asked, you know, does she want to go? And she said, "You go first." And he reads his letter, and you can tell she's not even listening, really. She's completely checked out. And then when it's her turn, she says, "I don't really feel comfortable reading anything to you about my, myself, because you'll just use it against me. And so I'm not doing that." And she gets up and walks out. Now, when you think about it, she kept harping on him lying. He's lied, he lied, he lied. Well, she lied. Because she walked in knowing that she wasn't going to share her letter with him. She says, "You go first," implying that she would go after, or else you don't say first. You go. Right? No, you go first. And then she says, I'm not doing it. Yeah. And really, that's emotionally abusive. Yeah. And she tends to be emotionally abusive.
It's true. Yeah.
And because he's a people pleaser, she has the ability to hurt him a lot. And that's what she's doing, is she's hurting him because she's hurt. And that brings us to my tip from this book, which says unresolved anger and resentment will destroy a marriage.
Will destroy a
and
marriage.
That's what we're seeing happen with this. Unresolved anger and resentment. And it's coming from her own fear and insecurities that she thinks that she has.
She thinks it's necessary to defend herself against anything.
Well, it's also, she thinks she's cleared it up, but she really hasn't.
Oh no, she's canceled it.
Okay, so she's protecting herself, and it says internally, people protect themselves through denial, numbing their feelings with substances, or closing themselves off from others. Mm-hmm. And externally, people protect themselves through denial or willful ignorance or lashing out at others. And there you go.
And she's doing all of that.
She is closing herself off and she's lashing out because she's insecure about trusting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Her own vulnerability.
Her own vulnerability. So it's sad because, you know, he would really like it to work, but she's not interested. So there you go. All right. Let's move to Alexis and Justin. Mm-hmm. Justin took her to his old neighborhood and to a park that he used to hang out at and fly kites at, and he flew a kite for a minute.
Until it got stuck in a tree.
Right. And she took Justin to the basketball court because that was her game. From elementary school age. And then showed him her scrapbooks. And so, you know, he talked about how his brother raised him and how his brother's whole mantra was figure it out. And that's what he had to do basically his whole life, was figure it out.
Which is where he understood and where Alexis realized why and how he is so hard on himself about being perfect, because he's always had to figure out for himself how to rectify a situation. And when it comes down to something that he feels he can't rectify, it's his fault because it's not being fixed.
Right.
You know, and he can't figure it out. So he thinks that he's a screw up if he can't figure it out. And, you know, that gave her a lot more insight into his psyche.
Right.
About himself.
And she gave a lot more insight into her psyche when they were talking to Dr. Pepper. And Justin made a statement that, you know, because she's such an alpha personality, he forgets that she really is sensitive. And that word sensitive kind of made her bristle. Ooh. And Dr. Pepper was like, what's with that word? And the reaction. And she explained that for her, sensitivity means vulnerability.
And weakness. And vulnerability is weakness.
Right. Because her mother was hyper independent. All the women in her family were hyper independent. You don't, as she says, let other people see all of your cards. Yeah. You don't, you know, give any kind of indication of how you're feeling. And, you know, and Dr. Pepper said, and you can't be in a successful marriage without that.
Exactly.
You cannot be in a successful marriage without being vulnerable.
True. Because you're not being fair to the other person, allowing them to get to know who you are.
Right. So. And so that was kind of an aha moment for her, and she had to say, well, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. You know, I'm working on being softer.
Reluctant obedience.
All right, Stasha and Nate. Mm-hmm. Both of them took the other to their old neighborhoods. And Nate's dad popped up, which made me think that he still lives in the neighborhood.
Possibly. I mean, it looked like a nice neighborhood, single homes and so on and so forth. But, it's possible. And maybe he just showed up.
And it was, cute how Dad kind of got choked up talking about raising them. And Stasha was rubbing her nose and her tears on Nate's shirt. And at one time, he looked like ill. And she's like, oh, sorry. But, but that was a nice conversation for her to have with Dad. She wasn't quite sure whether she should call him by his first name or Dad. But, yeah. And then when, after Stasha took Nate to her neighborhood and he found out how much of a hustler she was selling purses,
he used to sell purses too.
In high school. But she took him to meet the family that she lived with.
In her senior year in high school.
Right, during her senior year, a white family, and he got to chat with them. And it reminded me, I also lived with a white family my last year of high school, because I chose not to come back to where my family was from, because it was my last year of high school. I wanted to graduate with the people that I had been with for 3 years. And so I understand that whole thing. I did not emancipate myself from my parents, but I did have that same experience, and it was very interesting. But it was interesting when they were talking to Dr. Pepper, when Stasha was talking about how she likes to move quickly, and she was kind of wanting Nate to come along
at her speed.
Yeah. And Dr. Pepper said,
"You are not marrying you."
Yeah, but you did marry you.
Yeah. And I think,
ding, ding.
That was so concise and so truly on the nail head. I mean, because again, you're looking at what when it comes down to feelings and relationships, and what you're willing to give and provide for your significant other. And it's almost like you want that reciprocated to you because it's what you know. But everybody is an individual, and that was just such a classic line, and in minimal wording. You are not marrying you.
And that goes back to a tip that we shared a couple weeks ago, that oneness in harmony is not sameness. Yeah, you want oneness in harmony, but you're not supposed to be exactly the same.
Yeah, that's boring.
Common values and all that is important, but you're not the same person. Yeah. And how you do things, you should not be expecting your spouse to do it the same way. Alexis, at one time, right at the beginning, when they went back to what happened at the restaurant, right at the very beginning of the show, and they met outside, and they were getting their selves together, and Alexis said, well, I need you to say such and such and such and such and such and such. Yeah, and it's like, okay, but if he's not using those words, okay, can he still give you kind of like the gist?
Yeah.
Is that good enough? So, so that's basically a great line from Dr. Pepper. And then the other thing she suggested is that when they have tough discussions, when they have to have tough discussions, they should hold hands.
Although she didn't do that with those two, but she did mention. Oh, matter of fact, it was Stacey.
Yeah, she said hold hands because there's an instant connectivity, and
that disconnects from either one of you being the problem.
Right.
You don't. When you're holding hands, you diffuse things instantaneously, and you realize that you are a team addressing a problem, and the problem is the problem. It's not that either one of you are the problem.
And it will change how you talk to each other, how you address each other. And that's just as important as what you're saying. And that gave you
delivery.
The tip of
yes. treat marriage like a partnership. Your partner is your team member. You have the same common goals. You have aspirations of your togetherness, achieving whatever it is that you're moving toward. And you have to incorporate the ability and the talent and the characteristics of each other to complete the whole.
Right.
To make a team that is capable of conquering the world, because you can't do it by yourself. And that's something that Alexis even mentioned about her history in basketball, that realizing that as talented as a person is, when it comes down to a team sport, you can't do it alone.
Right.
And a marriage is not being alone ever again. So you incorporate the team and you incorporate your partner in what you do and how you do. And being other-centered, you automatically consider them in everything that you move forward in. So you do it together.
Right.
Plain and simple.
All right. Kristin and Mitch. So in their conversation with Dr. Pepper, Kristin talked about how Mitch felt about her during the honeymoon, as in he wasn't attracted to her. He wasn't having any kind of feelings of connection toward her, no chemistry. And so she felt like she began to overcompensate because...
And losing herself.
Yeah, because she wanted to make him happy. She wanted him to feel that, a certain way about her. And in the process has felt like she's been walking on eggshells and
not being her genuine self.
And Dr. Pepper asked, well, what do you need? What would you need to feel comfortable just not walking on eggshells and being yourself? And she said, I need to know if Mitch still feels the same way about me that he felt during the honeymoon. And Dr. Pepper asked him, what do you feel about her? Can you look at her and give some positive words of how you feel about her? Which he did.
He did. And he has to work at it, because it's not something that and again, not having experience in relationships and understanding affirmations and how that makes a person feel. It's a weak muscle in him. So he has to strengthen that. So he has to work on it.
And the other reason why he has to work on that is because his obstacle is fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again. And that's the obstacle for many of these
most folks
of these couples, particularly marrying the way that they have, and having to learn about each other on the back end rather than learning about each other on the front end. Yeah. Right. And so so she took him to a softball field because she was very athletic, played softball. But also
long time ago.
Also shared that, in her household, her parents required her to be perfect almost. Perfection. Yeah. That mistakes or errors weren't allowed. And mainly her mom was the main one who did that. And so she always felt pressure to be perfect. And that she still gets triggered with that. And dealing with Mitch and their marriage, that's part of the trigger that she has felt.
Which is why she's tried so
overcompensating, hard. Right.
In retrospect, looking at how because we've always stipulated how much she's putting into it, but that's what she does.
Right. Right. And then he took her to his father's grave. And also spread out on the bed all kinds of pictures that kind of walked her through his life. Yeah. And him talking about, and being very vulnerable, talking about, not having much structure, not having much discipline or respect, and being rebellious, especially after his parents, right after they divorced. Right. And then when he was reading his letter, which was rather lengthy, he got choked up.
Yeah.
talking about the awkwardness and the feeling alone and not fitting in and all of those kind of things. And so he really became vulnerable in what he shared, which, then of course made her, want to hug him and comfort him and, again, feel connected to him. Which he said on the after party, I found out that when I'm vulnerable, then she's loving me.
Yeah. And things are better and it's smoother and it's working.
Yeah. So, Lindsey and Miguel, our last couple, Lindsey and Miguel, she was telling Dr. Pepper that she's trying to learn how to stop being so defensive.
And what she did was brought them to a dance class, which is something.
Well, Lindsey took Miguel to a dance class,
which is something she didn't do as a youngster because of the religion that she was part of, and it was restrictive in her mind of all of the things that she couldn't do. So this was something that kind of was a way to erase some of that and share, some of the things that she's wanted to do,
Well, and that went back to the issue of control. It was important for her to break away from under the control of her parents, how her parents
govern the house.
Right. Yeah. With the religious beliefs and practices that she grew up under. And so as such, anyone who she feels is trying to control her, she becomes defensive against. And so Dr. Pepper was like, well, then we need to help you understand the difference between control and help. As in when she was cooking and she doesn't see herself as a good cook. Yeah. And Miguel is a cook and was giving her some pointers, that she became defensive because she felt it was more of a control issue when it was actually more of a help issue. Yeah. Of course, a person can go about that a different way.
True.
So that it doesn't come across as being controlling.
And again, that's understanding your partner,
right.
And how do they receive criticism, for lack of a better term, but help in this instance, how do they receive your assistance? Do they look at it as you interfering with what they're doing, or are they looking at it as you're trying to make them a better individual at whatever it is they're doing?
Right. And then Dr. Pepper asked them if either of them had said, I love you yet.
Nope.
And at that point, no. But when Miguel took Lindsey to the house of Puerto Rico and began to show her things about his childhood and what he enjoyed about being there and
some of his
insecurities, right? He used the L word.
Yes, he did.
And then when he asked, do you love me? And all she could do was just shake her head. I really, really do. I really, really do, is what her face was saying, but she wasn't saying anything. And so they ended the episode by saying that they loved each other.
Yeah.
So overall, pretty good. Couple of the week.
You go.
My couple of the week, I think this week is going to be Lingo.
Okay. Why?
Because they seem to really be connecting and working through issues that they have, but they both seem to be on the same page at this time.
Yeah, they have grown.
Yeah.
They have grown together.
And I think he has surprised himself with how
far he's into this thing.
How far he's into it than what he assumed he would be.
True.
Yeah. What about you?
I'm going to go with Stasha and Nate.
Okay.
And it's because of their revelation and insight to one another during this particular episode, where they had a little bit more deep dive into the personalities and characters and how they became that way. And the similarities of some of the activities kind of just solidified, especially for Nate, certain ideologies that he had, and the power couple thing, the hustle, the hustle mentality that
the entrepreneurial spirit,
right? Exactly. And I think that was extremely beneficial for him to see and experience and feel comfortable knowing that he's getting that type of woman that he's always wanted. And for her, I think it's a situation where all of the elements that took place during this episode, dealing with the professional, seeing his old stomping grounds and hearing some of the stories, and dealing with seeing dad, that made her a lot more comfortable. And I think a lot of her reservations had softened, and just understanding that I just need to accept him for who he is. And I think she'll be pleasantly pleased if they can stay on the same path and move forward. So,
red flag couple?
Same old.
Yeah, Morgan and Ben. But Morgan. And it's interesting. You remember at the very beginning, hearing Ben describe himself, we were like, oh my goodness, this is not going to work. Thinking more about him and his rigidity with, his environmental stuff or whatever. But she has really taken up the red flag. And not saying that he has no accountability, but how she's treating the issue and is just...
I mean, she indicated in the beginning, if I find a reason to not trust you, you're done.
Yeah.
And basically, she's resorted to exactly that.
Yeah.
So they say, as the saying goes, when a person shows you who they are, believe them.
There you go. So believe her. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for our recap for this week. And as we look toward next week, we hope to see you again. Leave your comments, and we like to kind of dialogue with people who leave comments, so we enjoy that. So feel free, and until next week, love yourselves
and each other.
Bye.
Peace.